Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome to this Conservation Applied Research and Development or CARD webinar. Thanks so much for joining us today. We all hope that you and your families are safe and healthy during this COVID-19 pandemic and that everyone is adapting well, or as well as can be expected, to the evolving situation. I also want to thank you in advance for your patience with any technical difficulties we might have related to the fact that all of our presenters are connected remotely. I'm Mary Sue Lobenstein, the R&D Program Administrator at the Minnesota Department of Commerce, Division of Energy Resources, and with me today is Adam Zoet. Adam is an energy planner at the Department of Commerce, where he coordinates analysis between the Conservation Improvement Program team and other members of the Energy Regulation and Planning Unit. Adam also reviews Utility Conservation Improvement Program triennial plans and annual status reports, and is currently leading an effort to review Minnesota's cost effectiveness tests. He is a project manager on the research that's the subject of this webinar, and he will be moderating the Q&A portion of today's presentation. Our presenters today are Dr. Amalia Hicks and Alex Chamberlain, both from Cadmus. Amalia has more than 20 years experience in research, study planning, project management, data visualization, and results interpretation. At Cadmus, she leads emerging technology research and pilot program planning and evaluation, manages portfolio-wide evaluation activities, and mediates stakeholder conversations and processes, among other things. Alex has been with Cadmus for 5 years, working primarily on impact and process evaluations of energy efficiency programs, economic impact analysis, cost effectiveness, and program design. He earned his master's degree in economics with an emphasis on environmental and natural resource economics from Portland State University in Portland, Oregon. Thanks to both of you for joining us for today's webinar. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few webinar basics. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. Since the material in this particular webinar is pretty technical and very dense, we will be pausing several times during the presentation to check in and answer any questions participants have at that point. As a result, as questions occur to you, please do type them and take the time to type them into the Q&A box at the bottom right side of the WebEx panel and send them to us so that we can answer them at the appropriate pauses. We will do our best to answer all questions within the time allocated, but if for some reason we don't get to all questions, we will answer them after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the department's website at a later date. The slide set from this webinar will also be available. This webinar is one in an ongoing series designed to summarize the results from research projects that are funded by Minnesota's Applied Research and Development Fund, which was established in the Next Generation Energy Act of 2007. The purpose of this fund is to help utilities achieve their energy savings goal. $2.6 million of this fund is set aside annually for the CARD program, which awards research grants in a competitive request for proposal process. Results from CARD projects provide utilities with data to enhance energy efficiency program designs within their portfolios. As you can see by this pie chart, CARD projects funded to date have been in all building sectors, as well as some that cross all or multiple sectors. The subject of today's webinar addresses all sectors and discusses results from Cadmus's analysis of the investments made from 2013 to 2018 in Minnesota's Conservation Improvement Program and the impact that those investments had on the state's economy. Now I'm going to turn it over to Amalia, who'll get us started with today's presentation.
Good afternoon, and thanks for attending. Hope you're all doing well and not suffering from too much quarantine fatigue. Our presentation is organized into 4 main sections. First, we'll discuss the study's objectives and give a brief background of SIP. Then we'll discuss the methodology and findings of our economic impact and cost effectiveness analyses. Finally, we'll present our conclusions and recommendations. As Mary Sue mentioned, this webinar is going to run a little differently than usual Because the subject matter can get rather dense and complex, we're going to pause at a couple of points along the way to answer questions submitted during the presentation. We'll also take questions at the end, of course. The objectives of this study were to analyze the larger economic impacts of SIP investments made during the 2013 to 2018 program years, assess the 2018 program year portfolio for cost effectiveness, and share our findings with stakeholders and the public. Minnesota has a long history with SIP dating back to the 80s when programming began. Over time, new provisions were added, such as low income requirements and conservation investment levels. In 2007, the Next Generation Energy Act established energy savings goals for electric and gas utilities. Today, SIP's statewide investments amount to nearly $280 million a year. As you can see on the timeline, this study was preceded by another in 2015. The previous study, also completed by Cadmus, quantified the economic impacts of SIP investments made from 2008 to 2013. Our study picks up where the previous study left off, analyzing SIP's regional economic impacts during program years 2013 to 2018. A few adjustments have been made since then, including the use of different macroeconomic modeling software and accounting for the economic benefits of emissions reductions. Our study uses data specific to Minnesota wherever possible. Primary sources include Energy Savings Platform, which Minnesota utilities use to report program spending, participation, and energy savings. Annual status reports submitted by investor-owned utilities. U.S. Energy Information Administration data for historical and forecasted retail rates and energy consumption in Minnesota, and benefit cost decisions set forth by the Department of Commerce. Adam, has anyone submitted questions related to study objectives or background?
Not so far, Amalia.
Okie dokie. Okay, so I'll hand things over to Alex then, who will walk you through the details of our methodology and findings.
Thanks, Amalia. In its study, Cadmus looked at the direct effects of CIP investments made in 2013 through 2018, as well as persisting effects from CIP, like participant energy bill savings, which can last up to 25 years. The study included all gas and electric utilities that aren't exempt by the Department of Commerce. In addition to a statewide analysis, Cadmus conducted subdivided analyses that compared electric and gas programs, low-income and general programs, and the different energy efficiency portfolios administered by investor-owned utilities, or IOUs, cooperative utilities, or co-ops, and municipal utilities, or munis. The general methodology for the economic impact analysis is shown here. First, Cadmus quantified CIP investments and their direct impacts, including both positive and negative changes occurring in Minnesota. To properly model the economic benefits of CIP, it is important that money is neither created nor destroyed, such that every increase in spending in one area is offset by a decrease in spending elsewhere. Additionally, Cadmus only included direct impacts we could confidently quantify using available data. To model the impacts of CIP, Cadmus used software from Regional Economic Models Incorporated, also known as REMI. Its E3+ model, which stands for Energy, Environment, and Economy, uses what is called an input-output matrix to link together all corners of Minnesota's economy. Finally, Cadmus analyzed the model's result, which communicate changes in key indicators to Minnesota's economy, such as employment and value added. Although REMI is a rigorous and industry-leading macroeconomic model, it is important to note that impacts are best interpreted by their directionality and magnitude rather than their exact precision. For example, rounding to the hundreds place rather than the ones place. Since the previous study conducted by the department and Cadmus in 2015, Cadmus updated some elements of the study approach. The biggest change was the transition to REMI from Implan, another industry-leading provider of macroeconomic modeling software. REMI is what we call a dynamic model that accepts inputs over time. For example, we can tell the model that specific changes to Minnesota's economy will happen in a specific year or years in the future, which ultimately affects the estimation of total benefits. Alternatively, Implan, a static model, requires all program impacts be condensed into 1 year of inputs, obscuring the long-term, time-oriented relationship of CIP with ongoing energy savings. This added functionality allows Cadmus to adequately assess the economic benefits of persisting customer bill savings and utility avoided costs, and it captures the cascading effects of CIP investments, which create multiple waves of economic activity throughout Minnesota's economy. Moreover, REMI's new E3 Plus model allows Cadmus to capture the economic benefits of emissions reductions that result from energy savings. In light of this transition, Cadmus tweaked its assumptions related to program spending to accommodate REMI's new model structure, like the industries directly affected by CIP investments. To achieve this, Cadmus reviewed program data collected from utilities and strategically attributed investments to specific industries in Minnesota's economy to emulate CIP activity as closely as possible. Also, as noted previously, Cadmus modeled additional scenarios to capture the impacts of specific subsections of CIP activity. Lastly, for this study, Cadmus also modeled the incentives awarded to IOUs that achieve their energy efficiency performance goals. This slide shows a simplified diagram of cash flows that Cadmus quantified in its model. Understanding the flow of money from CIP through the regional economy is imperative to understanding the impacts of CIP on the economy. The light blue dashed box at the center of the figure represents all ratepayers. All Minnesota ratepayers fund CIP through their utility bill payments. This funding is spent on CIP-related expenses, such as program administration, implementation, and participant incentives. Sometimes, the incentives that CIP provides cover the entire cost of an energy efficiency project. In instances when incentives cannot cover the entire cost of the project, participants contribute the remaining cost, which we call co-funding. For example, a participant may purchase a new LED light bulb for $3. However, the original price may have been $4. Thanks to CIP incentives, the participant saved 25% on their LED purchase. The incentive amount, $1, and the participant co-funding amount, $3, comprise the total cost of the LED, $4. As a result of CIP activity, participants benefit from energy savings, which manifest as utility bill savings for customers and avoided costs for utilities. Spending changes that take place outside of Minnesota are not included in our analysis. For example, even though fewer energy sales result in less revenue for utilities, it also results in less reliance on fuel imports from outside of Minnesota. As such, Minnesota utilities experience less revenue loss than expected, as these negative effects pass through to utilities that normally supply additional energy to Minnesota households and businesses. I'll pause here to see if anyone has any questions on what I've covered so far. Adam, anything?
No questions so far. Something I was wondering about, would it be helpful to walk people through how some of the key economic indicators are defined at this point, or is that something you'll cover later on?
I think I may cover it in the next slide. If I don't, I will take a second or two to pause and cover those. But in the next slide, we discuss the overall impacts of the program. So I'll get to that then.
Okay.
Thanks, Adam. This slide presents a high-level summary of the study's results. Using REMI's software, Cadmus estimates CIP investments in energy efficiency from 2013 through 2018 will generate nearly 48,000 jobs and more than $5 billion in value added to Minnesota's economy through 2042. During that time, CIP will also add roughly $5 billion to the wallets of Minnesotans in the form of disposable personal income, like every Minnesotan receiving an extra $900. The second table normalizes the economic benefits relative to total spending. Every dollar invested through CIP generated more than $3 in both value added and disposable personal income, and every $1 million invested generated roughly 28 jobs. And this is where we'll discuss each of the economic indicators that are shown on this slide. REMI measures changes in employment as both full and part-time jobs. The labor force, the second column in each table, is distinct from employment. It indicates the number of individuals actively seeking employment, as opposed to the number of individuals employed. Traditionally, unemployment rates are calculated among the labor force in order to exclude people who typically do not work, such as children and the elderly. Although the total number of jobs added is nearly equal to the increase in the labor force, employment actually tends to act as a leading indicator of labor force. That is, as people not seeking employment see the regional job market improve, they tend to re-enter the labor force. The next slide will help visualize this sentiment. Output, the third column in each table, is a broad measure of all economic activity that includes intermediate outputs, whereas value added, the fourth column, captures the value of outputs minus the value of the intermediate inputs. Consider a bakery that purchases ingredients such as flour, sugar, and butter to bake cookies. These intermediate goods cost $10. The bakery uses these intermediate goods to bake and sell cookies for $15. In this situation, the bakery creates $15 of output and $5 of value added. That is, $15 in output minus $10 for the cost of the intermediate goods. Cadmus uses value added as its primary measure of economic benefits, and incorporated value added into its cost-effectiveness considerations, which we will review shortly. Here is a visual representation of cumulative employment gains from CIP over time. Each set of colorized bars represent the employment gains for each year of CIP investment from 2013 through 2018. As you can see, employment gains persist for 10 to 15 years after initial program activity. Employment gains from 2013 through 2018 CIP investments are estimated to peak around 2030. At that time, the persisting effects of each program year of activity will add nearly 10,000 jobs to Minnesota's economy. Over time, program benefits, including jobs added, begin to diminish as energy efficiency measures reach the end of their effective useful lives and the regional economy approaches a new equilibrium. While the decline in benefits are minimal compared to the overwhelming overall benefits, this shows the importance of sustaining CIP investments in energy efficiency. In real life, we know CIP investments in energy efficiency do remain steady. Every additional year of CIP investment not only grows the peak, but also pushes the peak further out, prolonging the positive effects of CIP. Moreover, it is important to emphasize that most of the diminishing jobs visualized here were jobs that were added because of CIP investment and would not have existed otherwise. To piggyback on this concept, net changes in employment capture both increases and decreases in jobs in all sectors of Minnesota's economy. Sectors that REMI expects to experience the largest employment gains are service industries such as healthcare and retail trade. Conversely, the industry that suffers the greatest relative loss in jobs is the utilities industry. This is expected, though, because the goal of energy efficiency programs is to curtail energy consumption, leading to less reliance on utilities and related infrastructure. One last note before we move on. In addition to modeling each year of CIP investment individually, Cadmus modeled all 6 years of activity combined. The black solid line depicts net gains in employment from this combined scenario, which estimates slightly more jobs added than when modeled individually. This difference is attributable to REMI's sensitivity to the total volume of inputs. In other words, returns on investment grow very slightly faster than the investment itself, which supports the argument for continued CIP funding. Now let's compare the contributions from different parts of the CIP portfolio. As noted previously, CIP adds roughly 28 jobs per $1 million invested and generates about $3.14 in value added, per dollar spent. Cadmus assessed CIP's electric and natural gas portfolios separately. Minnesota's gas portfolio achieved slightly stronger normalized effects, generating approximately 32 jobs per $1 million spent and a return on investment of $3.68 of value added, thanks to slightly more energy savings achieved per dollar of investment. Conversely, the electric portfolio generated slightly weaker normalized effects, resulting in 26 jobs added and $2.88 of value added per dollar relative to spending. Ultimately, both portfolios produced extremely strong economic benefits for the state. Cadmus and the department also assessed economic benefits by utility type. Here, munis achieved the greatest gains relative to spending, adding roughly 44 jobs per million spent and nearly $6 in value added per dollar spent. Like the overall gas portfolio, munis comprised the smallest absolute amount of investment, as shown in the pie chart, but achieved the greatest energy savings relative to spending. As with Cadmus's assessment of impacts by fuel type, the overall energy efficiency portfolios under each utility ownership model boasted strong economic benefits from CIP. Lastly, Cadmus and the department assessed economic benefits distinguishing between programs specifically for low-income customers and all other programs. Low-income customers are eligible to participate in general programming. However, low-income programs are designated exclusively for income-qualified customers. General CIP programs will generate robust economic benefits through 2042, while low-income programs will result in minor negative impacts. In light of these results, it is important to note several caveats. Low-income customers who participate in CIP benefit from fully incented energy efficiency projects or measures, thus requiring no co-funding from them. This invariably requires a larger contribution of CIP funds per customer than a traditional CIP program would, by design. Also, these results do not account for all benefits low-income programs offer, such as reduced collections or arrearages, reduced strain on other public and income-based services, and avoided damage from utility shutoffs, among other potential benefits. Moreover, as visualized in the line graph, the negative impacts of low-income programs are so small that they comprise barely a fraction of a percentage point of the total impacts from CIP. And while overall negative impacts on the state are negligibly small, the low-income customers who participate still benefit from potentially decades of reduced energy bills that, again, have cascading positive benefits not directly captured by REMI. Ultimately, the overwhelmingly positive economic benefits from all other programs can support the administration of low-income programs and the income-qualified customers who participate in them. We'll take another pause to check for questions. Adam, have any rolled in recently?
Yeah, there was one that rolled in when you were on the net impact slide, the overall results. Mm-hmm. And the question was, using GDP as a metric, there are monetary benefits for non-participants as well, as in ratepayers who are paying into SIP but not making energy efficiency investments are also benefiting?
Yeah, that is the implication. While there are, it should be assumed that most of the benefits that relate to participation will accrue specifically to the participants. However, a lot of the spending that is occurring in industries such as the direct spending on projects, as well as the emissions reductions that result from energy savings, as well as the respending of disposable income that's re-earned by participants will stimulate the economy further and suppress price effects for all Minnesotans. So there is a positive effect for everyone in Minnesota, no matter how closely or distantly related to the CIP participant that they might be. We should see everyone in all corners of Minnesota's economy benefiting at least slightly from CIP investments. I hope that answers the question, but I can clarify as needed.
Yeah, sounds good. Another question was, is there a reason why munis achieve higher levels of benefits compared to IOUs?
Yeah, so based on the data that we received from utilities, it appears that munis simply achieved greater energy savings per dollar spent, and that efficiency in terms of capturing those energy savings more efficiently or effectively than IOUs and co-ops resulted in those increased benefits for them, effectively creating more benefits for cheaper costs, which is why we see those improved net benefits.
Okay. Could you speak generally about just how do the results from this economic impact study, compare to other energy efficiency economic impact studies that Cadmus has worked on?
Yeah, we worked on a couple of other projects recently. We are actively conducting some research for Wisconsin right now. Our previous study for them was a 2-year study. In 2 years of program activity from 2015 through 2016, their energy efficiency programs created roughly 9,000 jobs for Wisconsin and more than $750 million in value added. We also conducted a study for MEEA, which is the Midwest Energy Efficiency Association, which includes Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana. Those 3 states created 15,000 jobs, 14,000 jobs, and 6,000 jobs, respectively, and a total of close to $4 billion in value added. And that's all from 1 year of program activity across those 3 states in 2014. The previous Minnesota study, which was also a 6-year study, created roughly 55,000 jobs and $3 billion in value added. So the results are comparable, if not superior to other states that have run energy efficiency programs and reviewed their results as we are doing here. Although it comes with the caveat that some states may have larger or smaller levels of investment than Minnesota. So the overall results shouldn't be compared in absolute terms necessarily, but we do see strong impacts by other utilities and networks of utilities that are running similar energy efficiency portfolios like Minnesota is doing.
Okay, great. Then just had a general question about will the slides be available online after the webinar? And yes, the slides will be available. Mary Sue will have more information about that. Any other insights about the key data sets that were used for the study's modeling? Anything related to that?
Sure. Yeah, I can illuminate some of those data sets briefly here. Energy Services Platform, or ESP, again, that was the repository that utilities use to submit data, and that data includes energy savings, the number of participants who participated in a program, different categories of spending for each program administered in each year of CIP, such as administrative spending, implementation spending, incentives, etc. And so we're privileged to have this very granular and robust data set from the utilities to use on this analysis that really help facilitate the analysis and make it as robust as possible. The Energy Information Administration, excuse me, the U.S. EIA, they provide data for historical and forecasted energy prices. Their EIA Annual Energy Outlook provides a forecast for a region of states that we use to apply to Minnesota. Minnesota belongs to the West North Central region, for anyone who chooses to go peruse this afterward. And their Form 861 and 176 data provide the historic prices, so we can have very specific numbers for those when we are looking backward to try to determine impacts for 2013 through 2018. The IOU annual reports have quite a bit of information specific to those utilities themselves. We used Xcel Energy's information to make assumptions about the composition of statewide co-funding for energy efficiency projects. So one of the things that we're missing from ESP, unfortunately, is the amount that participants spent in addition to the incentives they received. That's the co-funding element of all of this. However, the IOU report, the annual report from Xcel Energy, actually tracked this information. So we use that data and we made some assumptions based on the composition of co-funding versus incentives for Xcel Energy customers, and we applied those assumptions to the rest of the data set. So we made our best educated guess to determine the total amount that participants in Minnesota spent in addition to the utilities they received. And finally, we used the Department of Commerce's e-docket system, and their e-docket system contains cost effectiveness decisions, triennial plans, and other critical sources of information to help inform our cost effectiveness analysis, which we'll be discussing shortly here.
Sounds good. Another general question on data. Someone asked, did you gather data on different types of programs and their effectiveness?
So we do have data for specific programs. We in ESP, each program is categorized by one of several dozen different labels. It could be anything from what we call an upstream lighting program, to a weatherization program, to a demand response program. We do have the opportunity and the granularity of data to perform an analysis based on each of these program types. However, we opted to just roll everything up into one big analysis for the sake of classifying these results at the state level. But again, to directly answer that question, we do have data that would enable us to see if X program type is more cost effective or generates more net benefits than Y program type. And that is something that we could consider in future studies in conjunction with the department's decision and their judgment.
Great, thank you. Kind of a related question, and I'm not sure if you're able to answer this from the results of this study, just kind of based on your concluding remark to the last question. But are there certain demographic groups who are benefiting more from SIP, for example, homeowners versus renters?
That is something I cannot attest to, at least not immediately. We would probably need to dig back through the data to see if there's any kind of indications of ways we can attribute those economic benefits to those particular demographies. Also, we'd probably need to consult the experts at REMI to see if they'd be able to help us refine our modeling techniques. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility of being able to determine economic impacts among certain cross-sections of Minnesota's constituency, but we don't have kind of the data or information available to us at this exact moment to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I might just add to that that we might be able to speculate a little bit. I think that low-income populations have subsidized incentives, and so there is probably some indication that perhaps, when you just comparing low-income to other populations, they probably receive more benefits on the outset, but in terms of what comes out of the modeling right now, it's not delineating between those things. And you could also, I suppose, speculate that, homeowners, if they're participating in programs where they're having subsidized weatherization on their homes, could, help increase the property value. I mean, that again is another thing that's not captured in detail in this modeling right now.
Alrighty, thanks. For answering those questions. It looks like that's it for now.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Thanks for relaying those messages for us, and keep the messages coming as we go. If there are any additional questions about the previous results, I'm more than happy to answer them at the end again. I don't want anyone to feel left out. This next session describes another way to look at CIP investments and their relative benefits and costs through the lens of standardized cost-effectiveness tests. For this part of the study, Cadmus looked at CIP investments made in 2018 by all non-exempt utilities. Minnesota utilities calculate costs and benefits according to 4 primary tests. Values from Commerce's cost-effectiveness decisions were used in our calculations. Benefit-cost ratios above 1 are considered cost-effective. The societal cost test is the primary test in Minnesota. This test includes all impacts on society, such as those to the participants and utilities, as well as broader societal considerations, like emissions reductions. The utility cost test assesses the benefits and costs of CIP programs exclusively from the perspective of utilities. Similarly, the participant cost test assesses the benefits and costs of CIP programs exclusively from the perspective of program participants. Finally, the rate impact measure test indicates how an energy efficiency resource may affect energy retail rates or energy prices. In nearly all instances, energy efficiency programming will fail to achieve a benefit-cost ratio higher than 1 for the RIM test. This is because participant bill savings commonly exceed utility-avoided costs, resulting in a revenue shortfall. However, this test is controversial because it only accounts for a narrow range of benefits and costs and fails to account for other important factors. The resulting net cost through the RIM test, however, can help calculate the potential magnitude of changes to retail rates for utilities to recover their lost revenues over time. Synapse Energy, in a 2018 report, recommended against using the RIM test to screen for cost effectiveness. It is best used for informational purposes only. Here are the results for the statewide electric portfolio. These results exclude economic impacts and performance incentives for IOUs. As you can see, CIP passes the SCT, PCT, and UCT tests, but not the RIM test. For the SCT test, the primary test in Minnesota, CIP will generate nearly $700 million in net benefits through 2037 from 2018 program activity alone. As a comparison, Xcel Energy's 2018 electric portfolio demonstrated cost effectiveness according to these tests as well. As previously noted, the electric CIP portfolios of both Xcel Energy and all of Minnesota fail the RIM test. Like its electric portfolio, CIP's gas portfolio exhibits cost effectiveness for the SCT, PCT, and UCT tests, but fails the RIM test. The gas portfolio is less cost effective than is implied by the economic impact analysis results. This is because the economic impact and cost effectiveness analyses account for benefits and costs in different ways. Ultimately, the gas portfolio generated roughly $130 million in net benefits according to the SCT test from its 2018 investments. The Department of Commerce recently published a paper about updating the energy efficiency cost effectiveness framework in Minnesota. Cadmus applied some of the recommendations in what we're calling an enhanced cost-effectiveness analysis. These changes include accounting for performance incentives awarded to IOUs, as well as the regional economic impacts that Cadmus modeled. For comparison, neighboring Wisconsin incorporates economic benefits in the form of value added into its cost-effectiveness analysis. In doing so, its total benefit cost ratio jumped from 3.24 to 4.77. Here's what happens when we apply these enhancements to Minnesota. When incorporating economic impacts into the SCT test, net benefits more than double, approaching $1.7 billion through 2037. As for the UCT and RIM tests, net benefits decrease slightly once Cadmus is accounted for IOU performance incentives. These incentives are funded by ratepayers and paid out to utilities that achieve their savings goals. Despite the changes in net benefits, the overarching takeaways remain the same. CIP investments are extremely cost-effective, with each year of program activity generating potentially billions of dollars in net benefits over the course of 2 decades. Again, I'll check in with Adam one last time to see if we have any questions. Adam?
Yeah, there was one question that came in asking why is the comparison between the state of Minnesota and Xcel Energy, and I think that's related to the cost effectiveness comparison.
I'm sorry, what is the question exactly?
The question is why is the comparison between the state of Minnesota and Xcel Energy?
Why are we comparing those two? Xcel Energy is the largest utility in Minnesota. It serves, I can't attest to the service territory and the number of customers served, but it's at least half, if not significantly more, I think. So it makes for a good proxy in terms of us trying to judge whether our cost of effectiveness results are reasonable in terms of what we're getting and comparing them to what the main utilities in Minnesota are getting as well. As we can see here.
Yeah, it was.
Oh, go for it, Amalia.
It was basically just a way to, like a kind of a back of the envelope way to check that the results that we were getting were reasonable. So those numbers, I believe, were calculated by Xcel, and the reason that we compared them is just to show that, you know, we're getting similar results. So it was basically just, it doesn't really serve any function other than to, you know, almost prove to ourselves that what we're doing is legitimate and consistent with what others are getting.
Right. Thanks for clarifying that, Amalia. Yeah, and CenterPoint Energy for the gas portfolio is the utility that we chose for our comparison there, and they are, if I'm not mistaken, the largest gas utility. So we chose just the largest utilities that cover the largest service territories and customers for that comparison.
Great. And does the utility cost test represent the total bill savings achieved by ratepayers?
The utility cost test represents a few different elements. It does include the bill savings. It also includes the avoided costs that utilities achieve. So for every unit of energy saved, it does occur that that the utility will lose revenue on that energy sale. However, they also will save a little bit of money from not actually having to produce that unit of energy for sale. We also, in our test, account for the incentives that utilities pay out, and also project costs. So those are the primary costs. And actually, I will correct myself here, and I apologize. Let me recollect my thoughts. The utility will benefit from their avoided costs of energy sales. We actually do not include lost revenues as a cost to utilities in this test, and that is as determined by the Synapse Energy Report that standardizes these tests. So that is just part of the equation in terms of determining the total benefits and costs. So again, the total benefits are the avoided costs that the utilities benefit from, and the total costs that they incur are those that they spend on CIP, such as the project costs of administration and implementation, and the incentives that they provide for CIP participants.
Okay. Looks like no new questions yet.
Okay, great. As with last time, just feel free to throw those remaining questions into the queue. We can get to them at the end once we review our conclusions and recommendations. Thanks again, everyone. So some key takeaways from our study. CIP investments provide net positive benefits to the state economy that persist for as long as the energy efficiency measures operate. That can be as long as 20 or 25 years. To continue benefiting from these positive impacts, continue to fund CIP. Supplemental recommendations include improving data for use in future studies. To better capture the full benefits of the low income program portfolio, we can commission a study to quantify the comprehensive non-energy benefits of low-income programs. We discussed these on previous slides. Also, the CIP portfolio generates such strong positive benefits that a small fraction can be used to help citizens in need, that is, low-income customers. And finally, CIP not only generates strong positive economic impacts, according to Remy, but also generates overwhelmingly positive net benefits according to most standardized cost-effectiveness tests, including the societal cost test. Consider whether this is the time to explore more emerging technologies or new program designs in the evolution of the CIP portfolio. And thank you for your time. Any last questions?
Yeah, thanks for that great presentation, Alex and Amalia. And at this time, if you have additional questions, please type them into the Q&A box and send them to all panelists now. Adam, do you have any more questions in the queue?
Yeah, looks like one question that came in was, what is your opinion of the future of SIP and SIP results due to the current pandemic?
That's a great question. And I want to clarify that without running a model and having the adequate data, I cannot attest directly to the precise impact that COVID will have on Minnesota. COVID will invariably have negative impacts, not only in Minnesota, but also worldwide. However, COVID itself and any kind of undue force of nature that affects us does not fundamentally reduce the efficacy or effectiveness of energy efficiency. Energy efficiency remains a viable resource that we can rely on, and the pandemic does not necessarily reduce the total energy savings someone might receive from installing a new energy efficient appliance. In fact, the need for energy efficiency might become even more important in times of duress, especially as Minnesotans increasingly spend more time at home. If folks are working from home more, they are going to be incurring larger utility bills because they're using more energy than they would normally. And energy efficiency can be a crucial resource in mitigating these additional costs that folks are incurring. It can be a big source of relief depending on what kind of accommodations they seek to acquire from CIP. We can dive in more deeply into that. the direct effects of CIP comprise the vast majority of economic benefits. In terms of looking backward, the pandemic is not going to affect any of the benefits that we're seeing from this 2013 through 2018 report. I think the biggest impact we'll see is, or inevitably will be, in the number of projects that are being installed in 2020, and that will be a function of the folks who are able to afford them, and that will depend on each household's financial situation. But on a per project basis, CIP should remain quite robust in terms of the economic benefits it's creating. I imagine that REMI, this industry-leading software, will need to update their models to account for the pandemic, and we'll see that reflected in the next study. So we'll have a better answer for that question, unfortunately, in hindsight, in the future when it's all said and done. But as of now, I think we can say pretty safely and pretty confidently that energy efficiency remains a reliable resource that should otherwise go unaffected by COVID. It's just a matter of the breadth of energy efficiency projects being installed in Minnesota while the pandemic is affecting us.
Okay. A couple methodology questions that I think are related to the current slide that we're on. Could you talk about how you estimated the GDP boost from emissions reductions? And also, as a follow-up question, just explaining the methodology for determining jobs created by SIP.
Sure. I'll start with the emissions. REMI handles most of the emissions calculations. We take the total energy savings that we expect from CIP, and we use what are called emissions factors, and those come from various expert sources that tell us each unit of energy saved will create X number of emissions reductions, and we can basically tally up each of those emission reductions in terms of total tons saved by various emissions types. So this could be sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides, fine particulate matter. We can quantify any of these emissions and put them into the model. What REMI does with these emissions is says, well, based on fewer emissions in Minnesota, it is now a relatively healthier place to live, and that becomes more attractive to people who don't live in Minnesota. So increased emissions reductions, I should say decreased emissions as opposed to increased emissions reductions. Decreased emissions makes Minnesota more attractive to live in to people who live outside of Minnesota. They come in, they buy homes here, they get jobs here, they spend their money here, and that has kind of the same cascading impact that we might see from the energy efficiency projects themselves. So there's kind of this added effect of those emissions reductions creating health benefits and financial benefits for the state. They're modest. They are only a couple percentage points of the total economic activity, but we're still talking millions and millions of dollars added to the economy from emissions reductions alone. We can see here that it's close to $150 million in value added from those emissions reductions, thanks to this improving the attractiveness, so to speak, of Minnesota. In terms of jobs added, REMI can the folks at REMI can better attest to the very precise machinations of the model, but it sees direct spending in certain industries of Minnesota. So we're talking about, we see project spending from CIP on light bulbs. We're going to see, therefore, more spending on related lighting equipment, and that spending increases demand within those industries. That increased demand is going to require more people to work those jobs to meet that demand. So there is a kind of classic supply and demand, tug of war, or not really a tug of war, but a give and take there, where the economy sees this increase in demand for light bulbs or for weatherization or for solar panels or for anything that CIP is trying to create more demand in, and REMI sees that demand and kind of pairs it up with an increase in supply that would be expected based on the total amount of dollars that we are inputting into the model for each of those industries. So that's where those jobs come from. And as those energy savings tail off and as we get farther away from the initial impacts of spending, we start to see those jobs tail off as well as the demand kind of slows down as the job, not as the job, but as the economy starts to revert back to normal, so to speak. So again, we see in one of those previous slides that there are quote unquote job losses, but this is more of just the decay of jobs that were added to meet that initial demand. And the best way to keep all of those jobs is to keep funding CIP. And those jobs will remain for as long as those CIP impacts are affecting Minnesota's economy.
So I'm just going to interrupt here for a minute and to find out, do we have a lot more questions, Adam? Because we're getting to the end of our time. And I do have a couple of wrap-up slides, but those only take a couple minutes to do. So how many more questions do you have?
Yeah, we have, looks like 2 more questions.
Okay.
Should we go ahead and take those? Or
yeah, why don't we go ahead and take those? But in your answers, Alex, keep in mind that we're running toward the end of our time.
Sure, I'll be quick. I apologize for running long.
You know, you have been great. Yeah, I think you've done a very thorough job of explaining the results of the study and detail and clarifying everything. Well, I don't think you have anything to apologize for. You're doing great.
I agree. Yeah, so this is just related to economic indicators. So besides dollars in wallets of Minnesotans, do you have an impact calculation in terms of benefits to Minnesota businesses?
Yeah, that is something that would be in the model. And unfortunately, I don't have those numbers on hand right now, but we can include those numbers in our final report. We do expect to discuss that. So when the final report's released, you can view them there. I apologize, I don't have an answer for you now.
No problem. Then looks like the last question is, with the utility cost test being highly cost-effective and the ratepayer impact test being negative, does this suggest that all of the savings of SIP accrue to utilities rather than ratepayers?
Not necessarily. I think the rate impact test serves a specific function to determine what kind of impact will be applied to energy prices in the future. I think that's its primary function. So really the reason why we fail the rate impact test is precisely because ratepayers are achieving energy savings. They're achieving those bill savings, and that's causing a loss in revenue for the utility. And the rate impact test being negative, that is an implication that the utilities need to recover some of those revenues that it's missing out on. So if we actually pass the RIM test, that would actually suggest that ratepayers are not benefiting from CIP. So there's actually a silver lining in that the RIM test being negative is inherently a positive for all of the participants in CIP.
All right, thanks. Yeah, seeing that we're hitting 3 o'clock, it looks like there were a couple other questions that came in, but maybe we can follow up offline for those.
Yes, great. We'll follow up offline with those. So let's see. So thanks, Adam. Thanks, Amalia. Thanks, Alex. Great presentation. And the recording of this webinar and slide set will be available on the department's website in a few weeks, and the final report in a couple of months. In the meantime, feel free to contact us if you have follow-up questions or want additional information about this CARD project. When the final report and webinar recording are available, you can link to either of them from the quick links on our Applied Research and Development webpage, as indicated on this slide. This R&D webpage has additional resources and information related to CARD that you might want to check out by going to the link at the bottom of the page. Thanks again for your participation today. We really appreciate your interest in card projects. Before I leave, I just want to take the opportunity to mention a couple of other upcoming card webinars. One is based on a study conducted by the Center for Energy and the Environment, which will take a fresh look at cooling loads in Minnesota. Two others will report on the results from two baseline and market characterization studies, one in the residential sector and the other in the commercial sector. Both of these were completed by Slipstream. You can keep abreast of upcoming webinars and other news related to the Minnesota Conservation Improvement Program by signing up for SIP updates on our email list. You can use the link on this slide to do that. And in the meantime, feel free to contact me if you have questions, feedback, or suggestions for the CARD program or for CARD webinars. Thanks again, and we hope you and your families will continue to be healthy and secure over the upcoming weeks and months.